Mary Cooper wasn't a perfect mother. She's one of the most divisive parents on television. Some fans see her as a loving mother who sacrificed everything for her children, while others believe her parenting created many of the problems Sheldon, Missy, and Georgie carried into adulthood. The truth is that both sides are right. Throughout Young Sheldon and The Big Bang Theory, Mary made countless decisions that showed incredible love for her family, but she also made mistakes that left lasting scars on her children. Today, we're looking at 10 of Mary Cooper's most lovable motherly moments and 10 parenting decisions that fans still criticize years later. Let's begin with one of the biggest reasons Sheldon became the scientist we know today. From the moment Mary realized Sheldon wasn't like other children, she refused to let the education system hold him back. While many teachers saw Sheldon as difficult or disruptive, Mary saw a child whose intelligence needed the right environment. She met with principals, challenged school decisions, and pushed educators to give Sheldon opportunities that matched his abilities.
All I care about is that my son gets the education he deserves. So you all are going to have to figure this out.
Without her determination, Sheldon may never have skipped grades or entered university at such a young age. She didn't understand advanced physics, but she understood one thing her son deserved: every chance to reach his potential. Mary was just as protective outside the classroom. Whenever Sheldon became the target of bullying or ridicule, she rarely stayed silent. Whether confronting teachers, questioning school officials, or standing up to anyone she believed treated her son unfairly, Mary made it clear that if someone wanted to pick on Sheldon, they would have to deal with her first. At times, she could be overbearing, but there was never any doubt that her actions came from love. Her care wasn't limited to Sheldon. Although Missy often felt overlooked, there were moments when Mary recognized the emotional distance growing between them. Whenever she realized Missy was hurting, she made genuine efforts to reconnect, reminding her daughter that she was loved just as much as anyone else in the family. Those moments may not have happened as often as viewers wanted, but they showed that Mary never intended to ignore Missy's feelings. Her relationship with Georgie was often the most complicated. The two argued constantly, especially after Georgie dropped out of school and began making adult decisions at a young age. Yet despite their disagreements, Mary never stopped supporting him. Even when she was disappointed by his choices, she remained present in his life and continued to care deeply about his future. Her love was often hidden behind frustration, but it never disappeared. Faith was another way Mary expressed her love. Throughout both series, she constantly prayed for her family. Whether viewers shared her beliefs or not, her prayers always came from genuine concern. Whenever one of her children faced a difficult decision, whenever George struggled, or whenever life became overwhelming, Mary's first instinct was often to pray. It became her way of coping with situations she couldn't control. Mary also sacrificed much of her own comfort for her family. Between work, church responsibilities, and raising 3 very different children, she rarely had time for herself. She spent years putting everyone else's needs before her own, often carrying the emotional weight of the household without expecting recognition. Financial struggles only made that burden heavier, yet she continued doing everything she could to keep the family functioning. Perhaps her greatest test came after George's sudden death. Losing her husband left Mary devastated, but she still had 3 children depending on her. Despite her own grief, she tried to hold the family together during one of the hardest periods of their lives. It wasn't easy, and she didn't always succeed, but she kept moving forward because her children needed her. One thing Mary consistently did well was encourage Sheldon to pursue his passion for science. She rarely understood the complex theories he talked about, but that never stopped her from celebrating his achievements. She attended important moments in his education, encouraged his ambitions, and believed in his future long before the rest of the world recognized his talent. More importantly, Mary loved all 3 of her children unconditionally. They disappointed her, argued with her, and often ignored her advice, but her love rarely changed. Whether it was Sheldon, Missy, or Georgie, Mary always wanted what she believed was best for them, even when her methods were questionable. She also created stability during difficult times. The Cooper family struggled financially for years. George worked long hours, and life rarely went according to plan. Yet Mary's routines, discipline, and determination gave her children a home they could depend on. That sense of consistency helped keep the family together through some of its hardest years. But for every reason fans admired Mary Cooper, there was another reason they criticized her. The biggest complaint has always been obvious. Mary clearly treated Sheldon differently from Missy and Georgie.
This isn't a joke, young lady. Yes, your brother may be smart, but he doesn't have a friend in the world, and I am sorry, but I am very worried about him.
Because Sheldon required so much attention, the other two often felt pushed aside. Missy repeatedly noticed that her achievements received less praise, while Georgie often believed he was judged more harshly than his younger brother. Even when Mary tried to be fair, the imbalance was difficult to ignore. Her desire to protect Sheldon sometimes became overprotection. Instead of encouraging him to solve problems on his own, Mary frequently stepped in before he had the chance. While that made life easier in the short term, many fans believe it also slowed Sheldon's emotional development and made him more dependent on others. Missy arguably suffered the most from that imbalance. Because she appeared independent and emotionally strong, Mary often assumed she didn't need as much attention. As a result, Missy dealt with many personal struggles alone, leaving viewers feeling that she was the child who was most often overlooked. Mary also tended to expect the worst from Georgie. Whenever something went wrong, she frequently assumed he was responsible before hearing his side of the story. Although Georgie certainly made mistakes, fans often felt Mary judged him far more harshly than Sheldon for similar behavior. Her religious beliefs also became a source of conflict. Faith guided nearly every decision Mary made, but there were times when those beliefs prevented her from understanding her children's perspectives. Instead of listening first, she occasionally responded through the lens of her own convictions, creating unnecessary tension within the family. Her marriage to George also affected the children. Their arguments sometimes happened in front of Sheldon, Missy, and Georgie, placing the children in the middle of problems they were too young to solve. Although both parents shared responsibility, those moments left a lasting impact on the family. Communication was another weakness. Rather than encouraging open discussions, Mary often expected her children to obey because she was their mother. That parenting style worked at times, but it also created distance, especially as Georgie and Missy grew older and wanted to be heard instead of simply told what to do. Her constant accommodation of Sheldon also had unintended consequences. By adapting the family around his needs, she unintentionally made it harder for him to develop emotional resilience. Sheldon grew up expecting the world to adjust to him because, for much of his childhood, that was exactly what happened at home. Mary could also react harshly to normal teenage behavior. Whether it involved dating, rebellion, or poor decisions, she often responded with immediate judgment instead of calm discussion. While her intentions came from wanting to protect her children, her reactions sometimes pushed them further away. Ultimately, Mary's greatest parenting struggle was balancing the needs of three completely different children. She genuinely loved Sheldon, Missy, and Georgie, but loving them equally and treating them equally were not always the same thing. Even when she recognized her own bias, changing it proved far more difficult. That's what makes Mary Cooper such a compelling character. She wasn't the perfect television mother, nor was she a terrible one. She was simply a parent doing her best under difficult circumstances, sometimes making extraordinary sacrifices, and sometimes making mistakes with lasting consequences. And perhaps that's why fans still debate her parenting years after both shows ended. One of the biggest criticisms Mary faced throughout both series was the obvious difference in how she treated Sheldon compared with Missy and Georgie. To be fair, Sheldon genuinely required more attention than most children. His extraordinary intelligence, social difficulties, and rigid routines meant he often needed extra support. The problem was that the other two children noticed the imbalance.
Yeah, right. Everything's always about Sheldon.
Yeah, most of the time it's like we don't even exist.
Missy frequently watched her brother receive praise for achievements that came naturally to him, while her own successes passed almost unnoticed. Georgie, meanwhile, often felt that no matter what he did, his mother expected less from Sheldon and more from him. Mary never intentionally set out to make her children feel unequal, but intentions didn't erase the reality that both Missy and Georgie often grew up believing they came second. That same desire to protect Sheldon also became one of Mary's greatest parenting weaknesses. Whenever he struggled with a teacher, another student, or even everyday situations, Mary usually stepped in before he had the opportunity to work through the problem himself. It came from love, but constantly shielding him from failure meant Sheldon rarely had to develop the emotional tools needed to handle disappointment on his own. As an adult, many of the behaviors audiences recognized in The Big Bang Theory, his dependence on routines, his difficulty adapting to change, and his expectation that others accommodate him, can partly be traced back to the way Mary solved problems for him throughout childhood, instead of allowing him to experience the consequences himself. Unfortunately, that often left Missy carrying a burden of her own. Because she appeared independent, funny, and emotionally resilient, Mary assumed she was coping far better than Sheldon. In reality, Missy quietly dealt with feelings of loneliness that were easy to miss unless someone looked closely. There were several occasions when she admitted feeling invisible inside her own family, watching almost every conversation revolve around her brother's needs. Even when Mary eventually recognized the problem and tried to reconnect with her daughter, many viewers felt the damage had already been done. Missy became the child who learned to hide her emotions because she didn't believe anyone had time to notice them. Georgie experienced a different kind of frustration. As the oldest child, he was often expected to act more responsibly, yet Mary frequently assumed he was at fault whenever something went wrong. Even before hearing his side of a situation, she was quick to criticize his decisions, particularly as he grew into his teenage years. While Georgie certainly made mistakes, fans often pointed out that Sheldon was given far more patience for behavior that disrupted the family just as much. That difference made it easy to understand why Georgie sometimes felt closer to George than to Mary, believing his father was more willing to listen before passing judgment. Mary's deep religious faith was another source of both admiration and criticism. For many viewers, her beliefs represented compassion, hope, and an unwavering moral compass. For others, they occasionally prevented her from seeing situations through her children's eyes. Rather than beginning with understanding, Mary sometimes approached difficult conversations from the perspective of what she believed was morally right, expecting her family to accept those conclusions without question. Whether discussing relationships, life choices, or personal struggles, her convictions sometimes created unnecessary tension because her children felt they were being judged before they were truly heard. Her relationship with George also affected the atmosphere inside the Cooper household more than she may have realized. Like many married couples under financial pressure, they argued regularly, but those disagreements often happened where the children could hear them. Sheldon, Missy, and Georgie were repeatedly exposed to conflicts they were too young to understand or resolve. Although George shared equal responsibility for those arguments, the emotional strain shaped each of the children's understanding of family life. In many ways, the tension between their parents became part of the environment they simply learned to live with. Communication itself was another area where Mary sometimes struggled. Rather than encouraging lengthy discussions, she often expected obedience simply because she was the parent. That approach worked reasonably well while the children were young, but as Missy and Georgie entered their teenage years, they increasingly wanted conversations instead of commands. More than once, disagreements escalated not because the children refused to listen, but because they felt their opinions were never given the same respect they were expected to show their mother. Mary's desire to maintain order occasionally came at the cost of open communication. Her constant accommodation of Sheldon created another long-term consequence. Over the years, the entire Cooper household gradually adapted to his routines, preferences, and sensitivities. Family dinners, daily schedules, and even ordinary conversations often revolved around avoiding situations that might upset him. While those adjustments made life easier in the moment, they also reinforce the idea that the world should adjust itself to Sheldon rather than the other way around. By the time audiences met him as an adult in The Big Bang Theory, that expectation had become one of his defining personality traits, suggesting that Mary's well-meaning parenting unintentionally shaped behaviors that stayed with him for decades. Mary could also be especially harsh when dealing with ordinary teenage behavior. Whether Georgie was dating, Missy was becoming more independent, or one of the children made a mistake that most parents would consider part of growing up, Mary's first response was often disappointment or strict judgment. Her intentions were understandable. She genuinely wanted to protect her children from making life-changing mistakes, but her immediate reactions sometimes pushed them further away instead of encouraging honest conversations. Rather than feeling comfortable admitting when they were struggling, her children occasionally became more secretive because they feared how she would respond. In the end, Mary's greatest challenge was one faced by many real parents, raising 3 completely different children who each needed something different from her. Sheldon required patience and understanding. Missy needed attention and reassurance. Georgie wanted trust and respect. Mary loved all 3 deeply, but balancing those very different needs proved far more difficult than she expected. She often succeeded with one child while unintentionally disappointing another, making her parenting feel wonderfully human rather than unrealistically perfect. And perhaps that's exactly why Mary Cooper remains one of the most debated mothers in modern television. She wasn't simply a hero or a villain. She was a woman trying to hold together a struggling family while navigating financial pressure, marital problems, faith, grief, and 3 children who couldn't have been more different. Sometimes she made extraordinary sacrifices that changed their lives for the better. Other times, her mistakes left emotional wounds that followed her children well into adulthood. That balance of love and imperfection is what makes her feel so authentic, and it's why fans continue debating her parenting long after Young Sheldon and The Big Bang Theory came to an end.